I think of it more as like a prerequisite, like a feeder into that. I think we all have the capacity for empathy and to build upon it. And I think we forget it throughout our lives as we continue to grow older, as we get into our day-to-day routines. I see this in my young daughter, who's 3 years old. She has quite a great deal of empathy, and her friends just naturally, I don't have to really teach her, I model the behavior for her, but she does it without thinking.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the RevAmp podcast. My name is Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing here at Deal Hub, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Colette. Colette and I had a chance to meet in real life this last week. We both were attending the RevOps AF event in San Diego, which was a lot of fun. Before we jump into our conversation, Colette, why don't you give the folks at home a little bit of background about yourself and your role and how you got to be where you're at today?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Mark, for the intro. Thank you for having me here on the podcast. Again, Colette, I got to meet Mark last week in person, which was fantastic at RevOps AF. It was the first conference of its kind for RevOps folks, which was fantastic. A little bit about me. I have been in the world of revenue operations, more so on the sales ops end for about 7 years now, data analytics for a little bit over a decade. And I got into the role, I suppose I stumbled into it a little bit, which I think a lot of us have, right? When I first heard, what on earth is that? I met somebody at my company who was looking to build out a new team. And we got to know each other. We were working on a project. And he said, I'm going to get this team moving. I told him, hey, I'd like to be on that team. And the next week, I was his first hire. So that's how I came into this world and learned as I went along.
Yeah, that's super. It's true. I mean, I have the opportunity to interview a whole bunch of folks in RevOps, and almost all of them kind of have a similar thing where they kind of fell into it, right? Because it's somewhat of a new role, right? Many people come from the sales ops world. Some people come from other marketing ops, less CS ops, though some. Almost everyone's kind of transitioned. Not many folks have like started their careers, at least that I've talked to yet, in the RevOps role, because it's kind of this new thing. But because it's new and it's still kind of evolving, you actually don't see a very standard kind of template of a type of person or approach to RevOps. Often, I think some people have this kind of in their mind what a RevOps person is like, very nerdy, very data oriented, very kind of stoic and decision making, and not really relying on anything but data telling you the numbers. But I know that at the event we both were just at, you had the opportunity to give a session, and you were the focus of that session. I think it was called like what's most important in RevOps, something like this, and in parentheses you said that emotional IQ was critical. So maybe you talk a little bit about what that is and why it's critical in RevOps.
Yeah, absolutely. EIQ, sometimes it's called that, EQ, EI, you hear different phrases. Don't let that trip you up. It's all the same thing, emotional intelligence. Why is it so critical in RevOps? I'm going to argue it's important in almost any role. There's almost no role or career out there that you can completely avoid people if you like to. I like people, so that's not an issue. But dealing with the data, right? We can get in the weeds so much in the data, and we know the processes. We have our flow charts. We talk to the various stakeholders. But a big part of our role in RevOps is we're the glue that holds it all together, right? We are that intermediary. We're that party. We're helping to drive decisions. We're bringing our research and our data to the forefront. And it's not just about slapping it up there on a slide, right? Or through it, showing it on your screen when you're in a Zoom call like this. You really have to speak to your audience. And a big part of that is emotional intelligence. So what is emotional intelligence? Let's get into that. The phrasing of it, right? You have IQ, which is your intelligence, but EQ being a big component as well. There's actually a book I really like, highly recommend it. Emotional Intelligence 2.0 came out a little bit over a decade ago. It's had a huge influence on me very early in my career. I actually have it right behind me here. And one of the stats it's given early on in the book that catches your attention is 58% of your performance success is attributed to EQ for any job role. That includes RevOps. I'd argue maybe even a little bit more, since we can be so people-facing and we have to have that influence. EQ in itself is having self-awareness, being able to manage relationships, social awareness, and self-regulation. You mentioned an interesting term with stoic, right? And that, or that assumption of being geeky, which guilty. I'm a big Comic-Con geek. I do go to Comic-Con engagements, been doing that. Great. Oh, fantastic. I've been doing that for about a decade, and thankfully it's here locally where I'm out in San Diego. But I don't think we're one monolithic group in RevOps. I think there are those stereotypes. EQ, regardless of your personality, your interests, your background, I truly believe we can all learn it. We can take different aspects of it, adjust it to our own, and that empowers us to be more successful in our roles.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I'm definitely nerding my own way, and I think we all are. And I think, I would be interested in your experience where some folks in the RevOps space, people in RevOps roles, whether it's leadership or individual contributors, where they sometimes have stumbling blocks with regards to their EQ or EIQ, and maybe some ways in which things they can work on in order to, increase that.
Mm-hmm. I think a few areas, one that really comes to mind is thinking about your intent and the impact that you want to have. We can get really trapped in the minutia of day to day. I have to get this done. I have this meeting, this report for the KPIs, it's due. I have to talk to this person. We have so many moving parts in RevOps. That's been my experience, regardless of any organization or team I've been in. But going back to it, thinking about the intent and what impact you want to have, whether it's an email you're sending. Like a really good piece of feedback I had a few years ago was I was sending an email out to the sales team and the CS team about a minor process change we were going to have in our CRM. Let's go ahead and mark this, make sure to update it, or you're going to get a pop-up warning if you don't. I want to warn you in advance. And I had feedback from somebody on my team, and he's like, "Hey, can I give you a quick call?" Sure. I'll give him a quick call. I'll call him James, not his actual name. Does start with the J though. But James gave me a quick call, and I'm like, "Hey, what's up? What's going on?" And he's like, "What is this for? Why are we doing it? Like, why are we making this change? Like, I get a lot of these emails from you." And I'm like, "Oh, I thought I explained it." But I didn't explain it in a way that was, when I reread my email, I get it. Like, I didn't explain this little change, why it was beneficial for the sales team and the CS team. It was going to be beneficial down the road. They were going to have less steps in their process. This was going to be locked in there for everybody to see this information. We were going to capture it early on. It would make it easier months from then, right? So they wouldn't have to remember. And I explained that to him on the phone. He's like, "Okay, well, next time, put that in the email. Put that in the email, and then I won't call you. Then I'll know." He's like, "I admit, sometimes I get annoyed when I see these emails from the team, and I just delete it, or I get too many emails. Put that in." It was really good perspective, and I was really thankful for that he took a moment. Even at that point in my career, I was still working to develop my EQ. I think it's continually a learning journey. but taking that time to think about the intent and the intended impact.
Yeah. It's super interesting because it's like there are so many different elements to consider in that kind of thing, right? So there's different organizations within a company and their, goals and incentives that, you kind of have to map back when you are communicating, right? Then there's like culturally,
Mhm.
if you're working in a company that's international, some cultures, longer, more descriptive emails are prioritized. Others, if it's not one sentence, I'm not reading it. And it's like you have to kind of have to feel it out. And it's always it's kind of a minefield.
For
Yeah.
sure. For sure. I actually collaborate right now very closely with some of our team members, part of our RevOps and data analytics team in Germany. And one of the things about my German team, it's very, and I've heard this culturally before, I'm very detail oriented. So are the people I work with, which is fantastic. I love it. I get into the nitty gritty.
Mhm.
Sometimes I get the opposite feedback here where, okay, Colette, go at a higher level. Colette, go
Exactly.
at a higher level. But yeah, I think adjusting to different cultures and where you're working internationally is really critical. I've worked closely in a prior organization, cross-training some of our APAC team, specifically Australia, and not so much in my career right now, but in the Asia Pacific. I actually, just a fun tidbit about me, I didn't put in my introduction, but I actually grew up in Japan till I was about 10 years old.
Mm.
And of course, I wasn't working at that age. I was just in elementary school. But it's something I've really carried over into my career and in a sense with EQ and working internationally and having that perspective that we are in a global workforce for the most part. And I really try to, as part of EQ and as part of listening and interacting with others and working with a global team, taking a moment before I go in, if there's somebody from perhaps a country I haven't really worked with before, I try to refresh myself on some cultural norms. I don't go in with the expectation that everybody's going to conform automatically to American norms, even if it is an American-based company. I try to bridge that gap and build that rapport. That's part of EQ, right? Having that interaction. So we definitely have to take that global perspective into account.
Yeah, and it's like, it's so nuanced. I mean, being able to do that kind of homework's great, but there are cultural nuances in communication that, you can't pick up on, kind of reading things. It's like you have to get a feel for the conversation, and it's a challenge. And if you don't have that ability to pick up on those signals and kind of reinforce your own learning, like, oh, they reacted a little strangely to that. Maybe I need to take a step back and understand that. If you don't have that, it's tough. Now, you were saying that EQ or is something that can be learned. Are there people that are predisposed to having an easier time as opposed to a greater challenge? And is there a floor or a ceiling to, how much you can learn if you don't have certain kind of innate ability?
Sure. I've had a similar question posed to me. And I think a really big foundation is something that I advocate with EQ. A big part of it is your underlying empathy. Depending on what resource you read, you even sometimes see that as like a fifth pillar of EQ, your overall EQ. I think of it more as like a prerequisite, like a feeder into that. I think we all have the capacity for empathy and to build upon it. And I think we forget it throughout our lives as we continue to grow older, as we get into our day-to-day routines. I see this in my young daughter, who's 3 years old. She has quite a great deal of empathy, and her friends just naturally, I don't have to really teach her, I model the behavior for her, but she does it without thinking. In terms of the floor, I've had it posed to me, well, Colette, not everybody can be empathetic. No, that's absolutely true. There's roughly about 1 to 2% of the population who are sociopaths or something else. So that's roughly about 1 or 2 out of every 100 people. And I'm not talking about somebody, being violent necessarily, just the way their brain operates. So maybe in that case, no. I know there are challenges for some of my friends who do have children who are autistic. There is, sure, it can be learned in interaction, but the neurodivergence out there, it can be a little bit different, how you process information, how you see signals. It can be a little bit more challenging to pick up on that. And some of that has to be a little bit more learned. And I don't think there's at all a lack of empathy. It just is expressed differently. That's what I've witnessed. In terms of EQ and learning as a whole, and this came up actually during the session last week, somebody speaking up and asking the question, is sometimes I feel like I have really good EQ and then other times I don't. I'm guilty of that too. And I think a big part of that is self-awareness and getting to know what ticks you off. What ticks you off? Knowing. I mean, look, we're not perfect. There's something, maybe a pet peeve, there's something that's going to have you, it's not going to make you happy when it happens, but having a game plan in advance, acknowledging it, being self-aware, being self-regulated, knowing what to do in that situation, having a game plan, it's a lot better than being caught in the moment. And yes, I do think it's possible. Just to summarize the question, like in that book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, there's like 66 different ways you can do it. Do I do every single one? No. But I think I've taken about a dozen that I can actively do easily that work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's I have some experience at home with some of those things with our kids, so that was kind of the source of that question. But I think I, like everybody else, also question my own, and sometimes I feel like I have that self-awareness, especially within the workspace, and then I'm like, I kind of get everything, and then other times I'm just like, did I just totally miss the signal there? Like, what happened? To drill down into something as relevant for in a RevOps role, I think of one of the challenges that kind of comes up a lot, and that is, let's say adoption of a new product or solution or process or whatever. The kind of very data-oriented person could map out, it's going to take this many hours to get, this many fields is the most optimal because of this and this and that. But there are obviously other elements at play that would impact adoption. When approaching a project like that, where does, planning for utilizing your EIQ come in, and how do you kind of add it to the, workflow?
Yeah, that's a really relevant question. I'm in the middle of a giant implementation project. I'm the SaaS team lead on it, in particular, leading the data portion. And I'm working with a lot of stakeholders. For the new program we're going to be implementing, they are completely unfamiliar with it. They're doing most of this process right now outside the CRM. They're doing it, well, on Post-its, in some cases, Excel, Word documents, phone calls, right? It isn't tracked in the way we will be getting it. In RevOps, a lot of what we do is change management. There's the technical aspect, but there's change management. I had this discussion actually with some of my teammates on this project just a couple months ago in preparation for this, to mentally get us ready. Look, the technical aspect is not going to be the hard part of this. We know how to do that. We know the best in class practices. We know how the tool works. We are aware. We can make these recommendations. It'll be work, but that's not going to be the challenging part. The challenging part will be getting this entire division, about 50 or so people, to completely change the way they're doing things, the way they have done things for many years, and to get that buy-in. And with that, I'm going to go back to the empathy part of it, thinking from the perspective, listening. The expression, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, that really comes into play. Oftentimes people want to be heard. Give them time to talk. Give them time to express their concerns, because there are often concerns and areas that They might anticipate being an issue with the adoption of like a new program, a new process, a new change. And give them time to listen, don't interrupt, just let them talk and come back. You might not have a solution immediately, or you might be able to calm those fears immediately as well. People fear the unknown. People like routine. It's human nature. I'm guilty of it as well. I like my routine. I like my coffee. I like my shake in the morning. It's my routine. When I'm off of that for a few days, I don't like, I like to get back to it. I have a specific routine where it's human nature. So smoothing that over, it's a big part of change management and accepting it and mentally being prepared for it. And RevOps, you have to account for it.
Um, we obviously have all been through some wild experiences over the last 4 years, 4.5 years, right? One of those being COVID and the trauma that brought, and as well as the like complete shift in the way everybody works, right? So we all went work from home for some period of time. Some of us are still work from home or partially. Obviously using the communication tools, and there's many of them available to us to do that work, makes the job of being aware or picking up on signals and communication all that more difficult. Is that a challenge that you've seen as well? And B, how do you overcome that when you're not getting the same kind of body language or inflections in the voice or whatever it is that kind of gives those hints?
Yeah. And I would argue, I mean, this is a challenge even pre-COVID, but it's definitely more pronounced as we've moved into some people being permanently work from home, having hybrid, and just having more of that blend now post-COVID. How do I overcome that? Well, there's a few things. Writing, email, and sending messages, whatever platform you're using for like quick messages. Some people use Slack or Teams or whatever method you're using. You're right. I mean, the intonation, it gets lost, the body language. Well over half of what we hear, we're not actually hearing the words, we're hearing the tone, we're hearing the body language, we're seeing somebody lean in, or we're noticing somebody twirl their hair, which I can't really do. But we are.
At least I have a beard to pull on, but no hair to pull.
Yeah. But how do I overcome it? I actually had this just the other day, right, with one of my coworkers on my team, and she had some questions. She was pinging me through the messaging system, and I was getting pulled away from something I was trying to focus on. She was sending me messages. I'm like, hey, can I just call you really quick? And when I do calls through a system, through a platform like Zoom, we don't use Zoom, but a very similar platform, I try to do things on video if I can. And I do that because I want to get the body language. And given picking up the phone, it is something that I've really had to push myself to do. I am a stereotypical millennial. I don't like the phone. I like texting. I like email. I like digital communication. When I'm trying to, I don't know, find a service or a restaurant or figure out hours or figure out something, I like to figure out the digital route first, but it doesn't always work. It doesn't. In this case, I was really thankful. This was actually last Friday. I gave her a call. We got it resolved in about 3.5 minutes. If we hadn't have done that, we probably would have been going back and forth for a lot longer, which wouldn't have been efficient, and it probably would have been frustrating after a while. But we were able to get to it, right? And see that body language, have her point to things, show her screen, right? We were able to get through it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I guess I fall on the millennial spectrum of, I think they call us geriatric millennials, which is a fun name.
Yeah.
Kind of more Generation X, closer Generation X than not. But I am the same. It is a pain. The phone is a 100-pound weight. I do find it easier to have video calls than only voice calls. Perhaps it's because the body language is there. I feel like I have a better, handle on what's going on. But it's good to know that I'm not the only one that struggles with that. So, unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to join the session at the event that you ran, but there anything that we haven't brought up here that that seemed like it really resonated with the audience that maybe would make sense to cover before we finish things up?
Yeah. Well, we talked through the entire session. We made the full time because we had engaging questions come up. We had people asking. One of the key points was about EQ. I think I mentioned it just a little bit earlier. Like sometimes I feel like I have good EQ, sometimes I feel like I don't. And somebody else raised their hand. Yeah, me too. Me too.
E3.
Yes. Same. Me too. I mean, I feel like I've developed it quite a bit. I'm constantly learning, but I'm not perfect by any means. And I don't pretend to be. But one of the concluding areas of the talk, and something I wanted to leave the audience with, as I was preparing for the talk, a really good friend of mine was giving me some feedback. I put him in the hot seat to give him some feedback. I'm like, look, you've known me for a long time. I'm doing this thing for my own career development. What feedback do you have for me personally? You've known me for so long. And he posed a question to me. Colette, how long does it take for a plant to germinate? And I said, it depends. Exactly. Colette, that's exactly right. I'm like, so who cares? The whole point of it was to get away from black and white thinking, which in RevOps, and this came up actually as a theme last week in some other sessions, we can fall into black and white thinking because we are so data oriented. We want exact results. We want to have this nice, pretty flow chart. We want to have this process worked out. And sometimes we think very linear. And the same thing can apply when we're learning EQ, even that question, right? Well, sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Exactly. Everyone's going to be different. We're going to have various levels of learning. It depends on our life experience, our upbringing, even our genetic makeup, how much we feel, how much we sense, neurodivergence. There's so many different factors. It's so nuanced. And the key thing is just to have that mindset. It depends. It's variable. We're all learning. It's okay. It is great. It depends. So thinking of it like gardening, which I actually have just started my garden. This started a few days ago, a new planter box. I'm watching these little seedlings sprout up. It's all going to vary. It takes time, and you build it and you grow it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm not much of a green thumb myself, but my wife has been much more successful at getting stuff to grow in and around her house. And she gets a lot of gratification out of that. Before we do wrap things up, I'm going to give you the opportunity to tell the folks at home where they can learn more about you and some of the other work you're doing, both professionally and then some of the other stuff you're doing on the side, and where they can read more about your background and follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. You can find me at Colette Molteni. I believe I'm the only Colette Molteni in the United States, so it shouldn't be too hard to find me.
Really?
Yes, I haven't been able to find another one. There are other Colettes, but I haven't heard that exact combination, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I work full-time at RevAmp, so you'll find that there in sales ops, sales process. What I do on the side, and I'm building, I also do speaking engagements. I spoke last week at the RevOps AF conference. I focus on the topic of EQ and empathy in particular. You can go to my website at empathyelevated.com, and I do actually have a free resource on there for you for building your EQ specific for RevOps folks. So go ahead and check that out, completely free. Put that guide together for everybody. And you can find me there, find more information.
Awesome. We'll put that in the bio on our episode page as well, so they can get right to it. Colette, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This was super interesting, super fascinating, and looking forward to seeing you at the next event.
All right, Mark, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.